Hi, this is Sarah Mikesell with the Pig Site, and today we're here with Dr. Dermot Hayes. He is an economist with Iowa State University. Thanks for being with us today, Dr. Hayes.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Sarah.
Very good. And we're going to talk today a little bit about a new checkoff-funded study that you just conducted regarding African swine fever and some of the implications for that. So let's dive right in and kind of have you start with kind of an overview of the study and what your objectives were.
Sure. The study asks a very simple question. What would be the economic impact of discovering African swine fever in the U.S. hog herd? And of course, if we do discover it, we would report it to our international customers. And their immediate response would be to restrict the importation of U.S. pork. And they would do that regardless of whether we discovered it in Florida or North Carolina and Iowa. It would be a knee-jerk reaction and we lose our export markets. We use exports for two things. We use them to add value to the carcass by selling the variety meats, the ears, the tails, etc., into markets where they're valued, and that adds about $10 to the value of every carcass, and every carcass would lose that value. And then on the muscle meat side, it's even worse. We've got to get the American consumer to eat 25% more muscle meat, and that's a challenge. And it would require enormous reductions in live hog values to pass along those kind of savings, so that the American consumer would eat more pork. And in the worst month, the worst impacted situation, the reduction in live hog values would be more than 50%. In the first year, the industry would lose about $8 billion because of low prices. Second year, somewhat similar. After that, if we do not get it under control and we do not get back into those export markets, the industry just downsizes. We have an industry that's 30% bigger than it needs to be. We start shutting down hog barns, vet clinics, truck washes. The economic impacts on the U.S. economy would be huge, in the order of 60,000 jobs. If we can get back into export markets, the industry can somehow struggle through those first 2 years of losses, perhaps by hedges or with insurance products, or maybe even government support of some sort. And if we can see light at the end of the tunnel, we keep those vet clinics and truck washes open, and we don't have to downsize the industry. So there are two things. First of all, we've got to keep this horrible disease out of this country with biosecurity. And secondly, we need to get ready for the outbreak of a disease, so that it matters whether or not it's in Florida or North Carolina and Iowa. And the way to do that is called regionalization. And we would say, hey, this pig was in Florida. We can prove it didn't impact any pigs in Iowa. So let the pork come out of Iowa, and let's restrict pork coming out of Florida. And that's called regionalization, and that requires traceability, so that we can say where every pig moved from. And we can say in Iowa that we never imported a pig from Florida, from that farm. And by doing that, we get back into our export markets quickly, and we avoid permanent damage to the industry.
So that is an option. In other words, is obviously up front for the first several months, it's going to be quite chaotic, right? As you said. But if you can use these regionalizations, there might be some ways to get specific markets so that we can, not unlike we've seen perhaps with avian influenza, where we know it's just in a very specific space, right?
That's exactly right. But unlike avian influenza, we move pigs all over the place from
Right.
state. So the traceability challenge it's much harder for the pork industry than it would be for poultry. But that is exactly the point. We need to be able to show that the pigs from Iowa were not in contact with that infected pig from Florida. And the way to do that is to have a good traceability program in place. The software is there. It's called AgView, and people are signing up for it. And so I'm hopeful that this study and other news events will encourage more and more producers to become better at biosecurity and better at tracing pigs.
Very good. And I think you answered my next question, which was how do you plan to use this data? It sounds like this is really to help support some of these programs that are out there.
It's to emphasize the financial disaster, either of a 2-year shutdown of exports or even worse, a 10-year. But this is an update of a study that's 12 years old, and I can tell you that last time around I did get to present the results to the customs officials, and they were able to use this and other sources of information to obtain more funding for border security and for Beagles to test food coming into the U.S. or to prevent food coming into the U.S. And I know that the pork board began emphasizing preparedness after that first study as well, because I think all of us were shocked at the financial damage the US economy would incur if we lose if we have to downsize an enormous industry like pork.
Very good. And very quickly, I saw the study, and there is an implication to not only the swine industry, but also other species and commodities. Can you just briefly give us an overview of that?
Sure, if you somehow manage to get the American consumer to eat 25% more pork, there's not enough room on the plate for beef. And so what you do is pork looks cheap and beef looks very expensive, and people move away from pork to beef. And the way the market responds to that is the price of beef falls by, the price of cattle fall by about 5%, with similar impacts across other protein species. The impact on grains is only about 1%, and that is counterintuitive, because you would imagine we're feeding 30% fewer pigs, we
Right.
should have a big impact on grain. But we increase our production of poultry, and we export more of that poultry. And in other countries, they buy more of our corn and soybeans with which to produce replacement pork domestically. And so the impact on corn and soybeans is very modest, in the order of 1 or 2%. But if you think it through, it makes sense.
Right. I would think there would be an immediate market response, right? But then it's going to come back and recover due to some of these other implications that you mentioned.
Yes, that's exactly right. In the first 30 days, we keep feeding the pigs, even though they don't have much of a
Right.
house to go to. And after that, as the pork industry depopulates certain houses, we're building up chickens in barns and feeding more of those, but for the domestic consumer or for the export customer. And in those export markets like Japan, they buy more of our corn and soybeans and replace our pork imports with their own domestic production.
Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you again so much for your time today, Dermot. This was really interesting new study.
Thank you. Good to speak
Very
with you.
good. Excellent. This is Sarah Mikesell with the Pig Site.